Okay, we're getting started. Yay.
Good morning. Nice to see our friends join us.
Yes, good morning, everyone. I'm Ana Camino, and I'm the parent of Mateo, who's a junior at Roycemore. He's been there since freshman year. And I'm excited for the RFA to host this first What's Brewing coffee time with Adrianne and Mauricio Robert. Mauricio Robert is our college counselor. I'm sure everyone has gotten to know him a little bit at least. And an English teacher, right, for high school.
Correct.
And everyone knows, I'm sure, Adrianne Finley Odell, our head of school. And we thought that this might be sort of a good idea, not a total replacement of a way to connect and get people together, but at least some way for us to have some time, FaceTime with different people in our school who we might want to connect with and otherwise might not have an easy time going about it. So this is the first of a series of What's Brewing, and I'll just sort of be listening as well as chatting in, but feel free to chat in, write a question in the chat if you'd like. It just should be sort of a relaxed time for us to catch up.
Anna, thank you so much. We so appreciate the partnership we have with the Roycemore Family Association and all of the volunteer engagement that the RFA leaders have facilitated this year in this pandemic year. Ordinarily, throughout the year, there would be a lot of informal opportunities for meet and greet and, catching up. And I have to tell you, I miss that so much. So, thank you for joining us this way today. There are, 2 more of these scheduled for this year. And, I encourage you, if you enjoy this morning, that you'll spread the word and encourage others to join in. It's super casual and, just really an opportunity to connect. And we scheduled these or organized these really to also highlight some of our terrific new faculty this year that, again, you wouldn't have had the opportunity to get to know as well as you might have. So I'm so pleased this morning to have as our first guest, Mauricio Robert, who is our college counselor. And I have to tell you, we hit a home run with hiring Mauricio to join our team. He came in and just hit the ground running and has had just amazing connections with students and supporting our seniors. Now, of course, those students who are going into their senior year, they and their parents were like, oh my goodness, it's a change. And like all of that anxiety was put to rest as soon as they started working with Mauricio, because his expertise, his knowledge, and his calm personality is just so comforting to our students and our families. And I'm so excited to have you join us. Mauricio, welcome.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I just want to say thank you for having me. It's an honor to be your first guest on the series of conversations, of hopefully many more to come. But yeah, I've been super thrilled to become a part of this community. Like Adrianne said, it was kind of like a big and sudden adjustment for me, kind of coming now. It's my first time in the Midwest. And it's a lot of added responsibility in the sense that I'm kind of like leading the whole program by myself for the first time. In the past, I've been used to kind of collaborating with other staff members, other counselors. So that took some adjusting as well. But I've really liked the fact that at Roycemore, we have this small, intimate community that has honestly given me the luxury to do the style of work that I prefer the most, which is individual engagement. I think that you end up having the most positive outcomes in terms of both forming relationships and helping students achieve their goals when you're able to just kind of sit down with them one-on-one, meet with their families one-on-one, and just like let everyone know that I'm here for a collaborative approach. So professionally, it's been wonderful, man. I've been very grateful for the opportunity I've had to work here so far.
Awesome. Mauricio, One of the things that I loved about what you brought to this role at Roycemore was quite honestly your story, your personal story and your journey to become a college counselor, because um, you were kind of pushed in a different path, and decided, you know what, that I'm really good at these things, but I'm really passionate about this. And it was a very conscientious choice, to pursue this passion. So, can you share a little bit about your background and kind of the evolution personally, and why that might be helpful in your role?
Sure thing. Yeah. So I am a Mexican immigrant. I think that's been probably the most definitive part of my personal background. I came to this country with my mother. Neither of us spoke any English. But my mother had this idea, kind of like the stereotypical conception of the American dream, right? She kind of thought that you go to the U.S., you can go to a good school, you work hard, and then you can make something out of yourself. And I think because of those conceptions, she was kind of pushing me to always strive for the most I could academically, because her understanding at the time was kind of like, you dedicate yourself entirely to studying, you'll go to a good school. And she was telling me that I needed to go to like Harvard, Yale, or Princeton. I didn't know what those things meant as a little kid. You know, I barely spoke a lick of English, right? But it seemed like a tangible, like a concrete goal to work towards. But along the way, I never really stopped to think about why I was doing it. You know, I was taking all the AP classes. You know, I was doing like science research because like I thought it would look impressive. But no one ever really asked me if I was happy about it. And honestly, by the time I did get into college, and I did go to a good school, I went to Yale for undergrad. Um, what I realized is that I hadn't really developed any conceptions of what is it that I'm really passionate about. And honestly, once I was there on my own, trying to kind of carve out my own path, I I felt lost. I hadn't had that guidance along the way. Um, no one really stopped to ask me, well, what do you want to do? Right? It was more like, this is what you have to do to get a good post-secondary outcome. And it was hard. I wouldn't necessarily say that I thrived at Yale during my first few years there. It wasn't until I kind of just started doing things that I like to do for the sake of doing them. I started meeting with a lot of my peers in college. I started meeting with a lot of high schoolers too, just because people were reaching out to me and just asking like, oh, like how'd you get into Yale, whatever, right? Um, and I just found myself really enjoying having conversations with them and kind of learning about the kinds of things they hope to get across as their own personal passions. And I kind of really enjoyed the creativity that went into helping them channel those things. Um, so I kind of like accidentally stumbled upon this thing I finally loved to do, which was sit down with someone one on one, listen to the story they have to share with me, and help them think about, well, how could you turn that into something meaningful someday? Particularly with the teenage demographic, just because there's so much going on there in terms of all the unexplored opportunities and how overwhelming that can be. And I was able to empathize with them a lot because I was there. Um, and more than anything, I really value the gratitude that a lot of them were expressing to me. Um, so from there, I was like, this is it. This is what I got to do, right? So I went on to get my master's in education with a specialization in adolescent counseling over at the Harvard Ed School. And that was probably the best experience I've had in terms of my formative development, because finally I was actually getting to work with professors, work with classmates that were equally as engaged with the material I cared about as me. Um, and from there, I learned so much about how the college admissions culture is changing in a way to reflect new and healthy standards that it personally filled me with a lot of hope. I think that there was this fear I always had going on in the back of my head. Well, um, I can espouse all these values all I want, to the kids I work with, but will that ever lead to like systemic change? And I guess that maybe like a lot of individual voices could add up over time, but would that ever actually impact the people on the other side of the desk, the admissions officers? Um, but I worked with a lot of professors there that are doing a lot of good projects, um, and change is coming in the right direction. And I always try to bring this up with students and their families, and that was kind of one of the big focuses I had during the college night that we had back in the fall semester. If any of you had the opportunity to attend that, but yeah, that's kind of like my story in a very brief nutshell.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing all of that, Mauricio. It really kind of helps frame who you are as a person and what drives you. So, coming to Roycemore, you had a big move from the East Coast here to the Midwest, and this small school. What have been kind of the biggest surprises you've had along the way, or the moments that have been particularly meaningful for you this year?
Sure. So I think that the most meaningful thing to me personally has been how quickly a lot of students have opened up to me and like grown to trust me. Um, just because when you put yourself in a new environment, you feel like you have to, like, I don't know, put on airs or like make a good impression or something. But this whole time I've just been myself. I haven't changed anything about how I work or why I do things. And I've espoused transparency and open communication with all the students, all the seniors, and they've been all about it. Like, they've been reaching out to me. Even before the school year started, I remember that was crazy to me. I hadn't even started working full time. I already had students reaching out to me, emailing me saying like, "Oh, Mr. Robert, can you help me like with drafting up college essays? Mr. Robert, like what I do for standardized tests." And that's how I knew I was going to be working with a good batch of kids, right? Um, and then I met some other students that honestly they were a bit lost in the process with the whole COVID stuff. They were left hanging, right? And I kind of had to start them from scratch. Like, they had no idea what colleges they wanted to apply to. Some of them even felt that college wasn't a realistic goal from them. Um, Probably the biggest achievement I felt I've had so far here is helping all those students get into a college, their top choice, really. They've all been super happy with it, their families too. That's what I've enjoyed the most, being able to see these students that they had literally no idea what they wanted to do, and then all of a sudden they were saying, "Mr. Robert, can I set up weekly individual meetings with you? Can you talk me through everything? Can we form a list together?" um, and that commitment, it spoke to me, right? Because typically, the kind of setting I was working in before, while I was over in Boston, I was working like at a very large, public charter school. And a lot of the kids, it's honestly kind of like pulling teeth. You got to hunt them down almost. But here, they just come to me, right? And all I got to do is listen sometimes. And from there, it's very easy to help them form realistic goals to achieve. So I think that's what I value the most, right? The engagement that all these students have demonstrated. And I'm already starting to see it with the juniors. I've only had one meeting with them, but they're already reaching out to me, asking me questions, asking me for resources on how to prepare for the next steps. Um, so yeah, this school really has a genuine college going identity, and that just makes my job all the more enjoyable.
Terrific. So, thinking about the high school years, a student coming in as a freshman, what should they expect over the course of the 4 years in that college process and working with you?
Sure. So this is something that I really plan to expand upon during the coming years. during my time here at Roycemore. Just because I feel that currently a lot of the resources are concentrated towards the juniors and seniors. And I would have done more to accommodate that, but honestly, it's been a lot of catching up that I've had to do with those kind of like pressing concerns. But next year, I'm planning on kind of sharing clear timeline goals for, everyone is young as new incoming freshmen. So for freshmen, the biggest thing to understand is that you're in high school now. Everything counts. I mean that, right? All of a sudden, you're in a situation where it's not the railroad tracks that you're probably used to from elementary through middle school, where everyone tells you what kind of courses you have to take, and you've got like one teacher or whatever. All of a sudden, you're put in a situation where you have the luxury of being able to explore things for the sake of exploring them, right? I think that very early on in high school, a lot of students don't necessarily perceive the fact that college is right around the corner. They don't start thinking about what would I have to do to get into a good school until maybe, somewhere after sophomore year or something like that. By that point, you've kind of wasted 2 years worth of opportunities to make a bit of a name for yourself, right? So something I encourage all freshmen to do is academically start exploring. Don't limit yourself to certain classes that you think would look good on your resume. There is no such thing. The thing that looks good is demonstrating some kind of clear passion, but you obviously can't start high school out with your passion in mind unless, I don't know, you're some kind of genius that's been doing something since you were a little kid. I guess those people do exist. um, but you got to try a little bit of everything when you're a freshman, not just academically, but also in terms of extracurriculars. I feel that something I see a lot is that young kids, they tend to take a very passive approach when it comes to the type of involvements they have outside of the classroom. They think, I'll do my homework, I'll pass the test, and then I'm good. My parents are happy, right? What are you doing all that free time, right? Maybe you could be trying out new things. It could be something as simple as joining one of the many student organizations we have here on campus, right? And perhaps thinking about which of those communities particularly sparks your interest, right? But ideally, it should be something more about exploring things you could pursue out of your own individual endeavors. Thinking about gaps or opportunities for service that might exist in your local community. Those are all meaningful things you could be pursuing, that would not only be personally fulfilling, but would also help you kind of think about, what's the good that I can do as a young adult in this community. I think that we've got a culture set up in such a way that students often feel that they can figure things out once they get to college, and that's true, right? That's true. But that doesn't mean they can't start exploring now, right? Why not try creating something? If it succeeds, wonderful. Then you can keep rolling with that. And if it fails, well, try something else, right? Pick yourself up, right? So that's the biggest advice I typically have for freshmen. Try all the classes, actively think about which of those classes speak to you, so that perhaps you can start to pursue that at a higher level in subsequent years. And start to think about the kinds of things you could be doing outside of class. Don't just sit back and hope that the opportunities will come to you. You'll have to start seeking that out. And I would encourage those freshmen to come see me in my office so we can start thinking about, what are some things I could start exploring based on things I've enjoyed in the past, maybe throughout middle school, right? Now for sophomore year, in a perfect world, that's when you start to narrow things down, hopefully, right? The courses get harder, so you have to be a little bit more specific with the kinds of things you want to specialize in, right? Maybe there was a particular freshman year course that spoke to you. Maybe you fell in love with history, so now you want to take AP US history, right? But the one thing I start to tell all my students sophomore year onwards is the dangers of overloading on APs. Um, I think there's this kind of stereotype that was in large part formed by, I guess, my generation of college applicants. When the Common App went live on the internet, there was just this explosion of applications. And everyone felt that they had to do everything they could to stand out. And if that meant taking every single AP class your school had to offer, then so be it, right? But it's not like that anymore. Nowadays, admissions officers, what they value a lot more is depth rather than breadth, right? So if you're able to kind of craft a meaningful narrative in which perhaps you've demonstrated a budding interest in history your freshman year that later turned into an awakening of maybe some kind of passion you had when you took your AP US history class, which later transformed into an independent study I did into, I don't know, the repercussions of the Civil War and how, that's impacted, northern cultures versus southern cultures, right? um, Thinking about how the learning you're taking in your classes and applying that to things you would want to perhaps research yourself or spearhead yourself, um, that's the key starting sophomore year, right? Actively engaging with the things that you think you could at least demonstrate some kind of like interest in, right? It doesn't have to be the end all be all, this will be my life's passion. No, you're young. I can't expect that of you. But at the very least, that's what you love now. So let's roll with it. All right. So sophomore year is all about narrowing down that specificity. And ideally, I want those students to also start thinking about leadership opportunities that they could perhaps start spearheading, whether that be at Roycemore in particular. Are there perhaps leadership positions I could have in some of those organizations that I really liked from my freshman year? Um, or can I perhaps all of a sudden design maybe my own community service project, right? Like maybe you interned in some kind of community service project freshman year. That gave you some good ideas of like what good meaningful service looks like. And then I designed my own project, to kind of address some gaps I've seen in my community. That initiative can look really good, because obviously it's a lot easier to just kind of follow instructions, being part of something that's already set up. But if you create something out of scratch, it demonstrates passion, it demonstrates creativity, it demonstrates leadership skills. It's something that really stands out, right? Um, then by the time you're a junior, that's when you just focus exclusively on fleshing out all that kind of nice specificity that you hopefully narrowed down your sophomore year, right? That's when I encourage students to kind of push themselves as much as they can academically, right? So whatever budding academic interest you've had, take those AP courses, but don't feel like you have to take all of them, right? Like let's say you like the history and you found yourself as being a really good writer, right? So that kind of got you interested in AP English, and then maybe some of those social science elements, they got you thinking about psychology too. Maybe throw an AP Psych in there, right? But let's say you hate math. Why come and tell me that you want to take AP Calculus, right? Where's that coming from, right? You run the risk of creating academic burnout, um, which studies have shown that that's kind of like the main cause of student disengagement when it comes to high school experiences, and that can lead to things like your grades dropping harshly, right? You got too cocky, you thought you could handle it, and why even bother? It's not like you like the course, right? So make sure the classes you're taking as a junior are A, as challenging as you can handle, but B, things you would genuinely enjoy doing. Never feel like you have to check off a box or something like that just because you think that's what the colleges are going to want. It doesn't work like that. There's no such thing as that's what the colleges are going to want in terms of the classes you have to take. Okay. And then with the extracurricular involvements, but by that point, you really want to spend like a whole year doing something. If you look at some of the seniors we've had that had really successful post-secondary outcomes in their application cycle, getting accepted to lots of good competitive schools, they all had that passion project by the time they were a junior, and they dedicated their whole junior year just to doing that outside of class, right? And typically these were things that they sought out themselves or designed themselves, right? Um, Such that by the end of their junior year, they had some kind of meaningful product that they could demonstrate to highlight that success. Whether that be like a publication, whether that be even something as simple as like a letter of recommendation from someone you worked with that could speak to kind of like the engagement you've had all those years. But yeah, they committed themselves to that one thing, right? That's where specificity is key in junior year. And then senior year, kind of just have to keep your head above the water, honestly, right? You're going to be really busy with all the college applications, right? You're going to be doing a lot of work with me on making sure your lists are finalized and really solid, making sure your college essays are all up to snuff. If you haven't taken a standardized test already, you're probably like thinking about getting those in before the early application cycle. And above all else, making sure you keep yourself to those good grade standards. You know, you can't let the senioritis kick in first semester, senior year, because it counts just as much as junior year. And just getting those applications out. Senior year, it usually involves a lot of micromanaging on my part. Honestly, just making sure that everyone is getting things in when they need to be getting them in, and holding students accountable to meeting those deadlines. But I've really had, you know, minimal issues with that. I think everyone here wants to be successful, right? And you know, by then, I typically encourage all my students to apply somewhere early, such that by the time it's the spring semester, hopefully you'll have to worry less about the regular application cycle. And also your admissions chances go way up if you apply somewhere early. But that's just my personal philosophy. And again, this isn't like an all-encompassing answer, you know, just a very brief overview of kind of like the most important things that come to mind for me.
That's terrific, Mauricio. What a lot of great information. One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking was, you know, those experiences that students can craft for themselves to kind of really demonstrate a passion. Can you talk about a role that JST, our January short term, can play in that?
Sure thing. So JST, I think, is a pretty cool resource that students can take advantage of here. You know, typically, you know, you rush through the school year and you don't really have time to think about, you know, what I would want to create on my own. But here we have a system where the school culture is kind of centered around having this period of time where we encourage students to push themselves and think about, don't worry about the grades. Don't worry about, you know, kind of like making your teachers happy, right? What's that one thing you've always been curious and learning about? And what can you do to pursue that, right? So this is something that I think could be fleshed out even more. And I've been doing a lot of talking with both Ms. Rivera, our head of the upper school, and Mr. Harine, who's in charge of the JST program, thinking about how we could perhaps evolve JST to be something that be conducive to creating these sorts of continued narratives, right? Colleges want to see the story of, here's what I liked freshman year and here's how I built it up. You know, in the perfect world, that's what that looks like, right? So in the JST, we've got all these cool group JSTs that can expose students to things that perhaps their teachers are passionate about, and perhaps that could translate into things that would be contagious for the students. You know, a passion can be infectious, right? What I've been talking about with Ms. Rivera and Mr. Harine is thinking about encouraging teachers to design some of those group JSTs to have a continuity, if you will. Perhaps make it so that subsequent JSTs taught by that same teacher, they share elements of that of the previous year's JST while challenging students with a greater degree of specificity, or maybe a more academically challenging pursuit of whatever topics they explored, right? So I think that could be a cool opportunity for students to kind of help explore some of those passions with the help of some of their teachers. And I've also been talking with Mr. Rivera and Mr. Harine about perhaps making it so that in order to graduate or something like that, maybe you need to have at least one independent JST sometime during the course of your Roycemore career, because we do have some students that don't take advantage of that. Perhaps it could happen your junior or senior year once you've had the chance to kind of reflect on like what went right those previous JSTs, and what would I want to create in such a way that it's all just me, right? And then I'm bouncing ideas off my advisor, but in the grand scheme of things, here's this thing I built from the ground up. That can look really impressive on a college application, which is why I've kind of been pushing that. I think it'd be a great learning experience. But yeah, in short, JST is a wonderful resource. I think it could be even better. I think if we implement some of those ideas, it could help students with exploring their interests and also just leading to better post-secondary outcomes.
Great. We're Were there any particular independent JST experiences that any of our seniors kind of highlighted during their college application process that you think may have really set them apart?
Sure. Yeah. So all the JSTs I can think of that really stood out on those applications, they were all independent JSTs, right? Because they were all kind of designed by those students. And they were all typically something that highlighted like a high degree of specific academic interest, you know? So some of those JSTs might have been like independent research that student did on material science, you know, kind of working with faculty members at Northwestern, you know, like wow, right? Like what else shows that you're really up to snuff on that material? You're working with like actual like college professors, right? Um, or you'd have students that were kind of working in more practical environments, like let's say their career interests were medicine, right? They literally went out of their way to go to hospitals, right? And work with surgeons, right? Obviously, they weren't doing the surgeries themselves, right? But you know, they'd have their own kind of like clinical takeaways based on the experiences they had shadowing some of these doctors, right? That demonstrates like an actual interest. Or maybe you'd have students that had independent JSTs thinking about what they would want to design to maybe improve creativity at their school, you know. Like one student drafted up this whole plan of like how he would create like a maker space here at Roycemore, kind of taking some of the knowledge he developed working with an architect, and you know, like a graphic designer. All of a sudden you've got a student here that's not only engaging with the academic subject of it, you know, the architecture, but also thinking of how could I use this to give back, right? At my school, right? That shows empathy, that shows ethical engagement, right? Um, you know, there's a bunch more, but those are the ones that come to mind. You know, that kind of like high level of academic passion, that high level of initiative, and if applicable, you know, that empathy, that ethical engagement. You know, I think all those things are really going to stand out to admissions officers.
So, Mauricio, I've been doing asking a lot of the questions, but we have all these parents on here that may have some questions of their own. So I'm going to be quiet now and open it up for any questions that you all might have.
Hi. I'm Jennifer Morgenstern. I'm Alec Wilson's mom. He's a sophomore, and we're new to the school. But thank you so much. This is really great to hear and to learn about college counseling. And I am just wondering specifically more for sophomore kids. Will you be meeting with them before the year is up at all to talk about some of the things you've been talking about with us?
So for the sophomore students, right now, what I've been telling them is that they are more than welcome to meet with me individually. Right now, I'll be honest, because I've had to do so much catching up and adjusting to the community here, and making sure that I'm kind of getting everyone to where they need to be. My attention has been more focused on the juniors. There are still a couple of things I need to do with them to make sure that they've got everything in place they would need. My goal is for them to all have finalized college lists before the semester ends. So I've got to do a bit of a catching up there, honestly. But I've been meeting with freshmen and sophomores even individually, right? It's all a matter of if they reach out to me, I'll make the time, even if it has to be after school, right? Because I'm not going to turn someone down in that regard. But in terms of kind of like perhaps designing a group meeting, I have not yet thought about how I would implement that into my current schedule. If there's a time for it, I definitely plan on discussing like things that sophomores could be considering over the summer, kind of setting themselves up for success and perhaps developing some of that specificity junior year. But I just honestly need to sit down and think about where that would fit right now in my timeline. Going forward, starting next year, I'm going to have group meetings and time set aside for everyone, just because I'm used to the system now, and I'll be able to implement that from the get-go. But yes, if you have specific questions or or your son has specific questions, you are always more than welcome to reach out to me via email. I can set up a Zoom meeting. I can set up a meeting in my office, whatever works. And that goes for all the parents. I mean that.
Thank you.
I have a quick question, Mauricio. I love your explanation of their personal narrative of what they're doing outside of school. And I'm just wondering, besides their meetings with you, are there other times when this gets talked about, like during advisory? Is this a theme that they're aware of, or are they thinking about this from freshman year on, I guess is what I'm thinking. Like, are there
So,
other times during school?
yeah. So again, I think that a lot of this is due to, the fact that in the past, I think the college counseling culture here at Roycemore has been more concentrated towards the juniors and the seniors. And I'm going to have to do some building up in that regard, honestly, starting next year. And it's something I plan on talking about with Ms. Rivera. Obviously, advisory is a busy time, in terms of getting across the information that students need to hear, based on the upper school's agenda. But I definitely plan on touching base with Ms. Rivera and encouraging students to think about some of these things beyond just their meetings with me. I know something that's kind of loosely related to that we're hoping to implement is I think a lot of the more engaged JST planning is going to start happening in advisories. So that's kind of a brief element of the kinds of things that I'm interested in seeing from students from now on, right? But I think there's definitely a lot of growth that I could help promote in the school here by not just me, but also getting some of the teachers on board here, right? Because I'm not the only role model or mentor these students have, right? If you start hearing this from everyone in the school, there's got to be some degree of truth to it, right? So I've got to work on that. I've got to work on that collaboration, but that's definitely one of my big goals for next year, right? Making sure that the culture is clear from the get-go for everyone.
This is more of a curiosity question. Since this current cycle of students have been doing their applications and I guess college visits by Zoom, how has that been for you this year with mentoring and getting them through the application process where they can actually visit colleges physically or do some of the things that we think of as normal application type procedures? Yeah,
so it's been a grind, honestly. It's definitely a lot less convenient than it normally is, right? But we had to think of creative solutions, right? So we've still been having a lot of virtual visits from the college representatives. And what I've really been encouraging students to do is, even if you have like a modicum of interest in some of those colleges, show up, right? Because this is kind of like the only opportunity you have right now to engage with someone in a meaningful way. A lot of these college visits are just not being offered anymore, right? But if you can show up to that informational meeting, if you can show up with some good questions to ask those admissions officers, and you can leave a lasting impression on them, maybe follow that up with an email saying like, thank you for coming to my school talk. I loved it. Here's what I liked. That goes a long way in terms of demonstrating interest. And in terms of kind of like the things I do on my end with some of these admissions officers, if there are ever any complications that have occurred, because of all the COVID, because of all the remote learning stuff, I've done my best to emphasize that to them, right? Because sometimes, there can be dips in students' academic profiles because some of those hardships they faced in transitioning to the remote learning and dealing with that. These people are human beings, these admissions officers, and they can be really understanding. And if you call them up and you let them know what's going on with this one student that you love, they'll listen, right? And I try to speak to that in my letters of recommendation as well. Yeah, it's been a huge adjustment, but there are good online resources out there. There are still ways of engaging with admissions representatives. It's not ideal, right? But it is what it is, and we make do. We adjust. Yeah.
Mauricio, I would like to say thank you very much for this wonderful presentation this morning as well. I'll start by saying I have a sophomore student who knocked on your door yesterday and was really happy to connect with you about questions he had, Tomas. So thank you very much for that. I would like to go back to what you were saying about looking at JST and working out demonstrating the empathy and investment back in their school community that students have done. That's a wonderful thing for the college application, but it's an incredibly important life skill that really cuts way beyond college application. I think if students can learn to understand their personal investment in and their commitment to society in general, that's a really important thing for high school students.
We
Did you
lost
just cut
Marie.
out? Oh no. Oh no, I was really feeling that moment too.
Oh yes, I know.
Yeah.
Hopefully she pops back in.
Yeah. But I think the thing she was bringing up there, that's the most important thing. The colleges, they're placing this increased emphasis on service, community engagement, ethical engagement, largely in response to how unsavory college applications have become in past years. It's all about me, self-aggrandization, you know. Let me show you what I can pull off with all the resources I've pulled together. Okay, great, but what about the rest of the world? And what about those other students that they don't have the resources to do all those things you've been doing, right? It's a lot more meaningful if you think about how you can take your talents and do good for others, right? A lot of you can read about the goals in shifting these admission standards. This is kind of being spearheaded by Harvard. You know, like who better to do this than the people that everyone's obsessed with, right? It's called the Turning the Tide initiative. It's run by Making Caring Common, an organization I spent a lot of time working with at Harvard. They go step by step, bullet point through all these things I've been talking about and why ethical engagement is so important. Yeah, you're actually promoting life skills and strength of character in young adults, as opposed to promoting things that honestly burn them out and induce unnecessary mental health stress. There's even this kind of like tongue-in-cheek moment in the report where they acknowledge that some people are going to continue gaming the system, right? They'll do community service because it looks good now, right? They'll look like they're ethically engaging, but at the very least, you still up with a net community good, right? You know, there are people that are going to go about it like trying to game people, right? But hopefully most people start to think about the college process is supposed to be an opportunity to demonstrate the personal growth I've had, not just in my academic learnings, but also in my strength of character and the things I've learned about what I can do in this world, right? That's how it should be, you know.
That's terrific, Mauricio. My read, sorry we had you drop off in the middle, but you raised such an important topic, and Mauricio kind of expanded on that. But it is so much more than the college admissions process. I mean, we are raising young people to be thriving citizens, who are active global citizens, understanding what they have to contribute in the world and acting on that. And that's such an important part of kind of the Roycemore experience is, you probably have seen, for those of you who have kids in high school, and we're doing a lot of it in middle school as well, that student agency, the advocacy. We want students to recognize they have voice and they can make a difference. They have so much innate potential, and we're just trying to bring that out of them and shine that light on them and help them build the confidence so that they can be change agents in whatever way they feel strongly about. And the side effect is the positive college admissions piece, but that's not the goal. That's just part and parcel of raising amazing individuals for our world.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mauricio, I got cut off at mid-sentence. That's the first time in a long time that I've been cut off from speaking what's on my mind, but it was very literal this morning. But I do have a strong belief that there are rights and responsibilities of citizenship, and that we have to understand what our rights are, of course, but we also have to understand what our responsibilities can be, and how we can each contribute to creating the society we have in mind, for ourselves and others. So I think it's a
Right
wonderful
on.
thing, that connection to the
Right on, yeah.
JST and to college.
And that,
thank you very
yeah.
much for doing that.
Yeah, this starts with our youth. This starts with our youth, right? Like we set up the models, we set up the systems, we encourage them to succeed, right? And hopefully they roll with that, right? Like we can be their advocates, right? Not necessarily pushing them in a particular direction, because that might lead to conflicts, but perhaps nurturing, you know, whatever budding interest they might have, right? Then all of a sudden you start to get some of that initiative that Adrianne was talking about.
I have a question, but first I want to say I'm glad to see the shift at Roycemore. My son Theo is a sophomore, but I also have a daughter who's 20 who went to Roycemore, and to see the shift from, as you said, like this loading of the AP classes. My daughter felt a tremendous amount of pressure from her peers and from the school, that like, you have to take APs, you know what I mean? And I was like, well, why? To a shift where Theo is much more like, I want to take AP Bio because I want to go into biotech and I'm really interested in that. And I really, you know, as opposed to like, well, I have to have APs.
No.
So I'm very happy to see that shift in the direction, because my husband and I were both like, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to take APs. You don't have to. So I'm very happy to see that. And because, you know, some of it was coming from the other students, but I also felt like that was part of the culture. But Theo is taking initiative, because it's the culture, of course, to go to college, that he's already starting conversations with me about, you know, he's starting to think about the process. And my question is, this recent conversation we had 2 days ago was, you know, that he doesn't want to go to like some place in a cornfield, you know, he wants to be in an urban area. How can he start thinking about where, because I said, well, do you want to stay in the Midwest? Do you want to, you know, go to the West Coast, East Coast? And he was like, so how do you start helping him to think about what he really is after, aside from he doesn't want to be in a cornfield?
Sure. So when it comes to something as broad as that, what you have to do is honestly just start using some of these kind of like website-based college exploration tools. I'm a pretty big fan of a website called niche.com. I like it because it pulls a lot of national data that is often user submitted, and also kind of reports like actual decisions outcomes. But it's got like a cool kind of like match feature, where basically you indicate some rough preferences, you know, whether that be something as broad as like geographical preference, and then maybe you throw in your current GPA in there, maybe you throw in some academic preferences, and it starts spitting out schools at you. And then from there, you kind of click on the schools that sound even remotely interesting, and then it spits out schools that are similar to this. And then you start doing the deep dive down the rabbit hole. There's another tool that I typically introduce junior year, but if you'd like, I could help, you know, set them up with an account now. It's Naviance. It can be a powerful tool in terms of some of the analytics we have, and that it presents data from previous Roycemore students. Now, as wonderful as it is having a small school, honestly, one of the downsides I've seen is that in terms of the data we historically have, there's not as much there for it to be super robust, but something is there. And you can kind of like compare your academic profile as it currently stands to the academic profile of previous Roycemore students, all anonymous, of course, right? But it can basically show you like, where were these students applying to college? Where did they get into? Naviance also has a tool similar to niche.com. It's called Supermatch, where again, similar deal. You put in your student demographic information, you put your academic background information, you put whatever preferences you might have right now, and again, it spits out another list at you. And you can create a list of colleges I'm thinking about. And I, as a counselor, can view that for all my students, and I can kind of leave my comments on students' accounts saying like, yeah, I think this school will be great for you. Come see me if you want to talk about it, whatever, right? And again, it does kind of that similar thing of recommending similar colleges, right? So those are the two big college exploration tools I typically propose for students. They're like, I have no idea where to start. Where do I go from here, right? So check out niche.com. It's super easy to make an account, really easy. And if you'd like me to run you through Naviance, I'm totally happy to do that as well. I could get you set up with an account there. Yeah.
Thank you. That spurred another question in regards to my daughter, because of that, she did experience academic burnout, and she's taking a break right now, which again with COVID is a good year to kind of have a gap year. But how do you recover from that? How do you counteract that academic burnout element?
Yeah. So that's a very challenging question to answer, because it's something that I think depends on the individual, right? The academic burnout is something that's typically born from a wide variety of small factors, typically adding up to a big result like that, right? So you have to kind of sit down and think about, what was I doing that wasn't healthy? What was I doing that didn't bring me joy, right? What was I doing because it felt like I was doing it just for the sake of others' expectations, right? Those are the things you say no more, right? And from there, as to how you heal, I think it takes a lot of advocacy and support from people you trust, people you look up to, being able to sit down and have a conversation with someone, letting them know that it's okay to fail sometimes, right? Don't feel like it's the end of the world. And where do you want to go from here, right? What are the things that perhaps you did put a smile on your face, or what are the things that you did find yourself being excited to wake up to every morning? All of a sudden you have to start exploring those things, right? And it's different in college, because then you have to like think about like, what does that mean in terms of maybe like changing a major or something like that. It's a little more manageable in high school, because it's more flexible, right? And typically students like that, they'd be working with me if they feel like they're having this academic burnout, at which point I probably want to sit down with them one-on-one and think about, well, where's this coming from, you know? And it's something that I've experienced firsthand. It's something I can empathize with, right? So I can kind of see the signs of it. And anytime I see some of those warning factors, like the students are coming to me and asking me, Mr. Robert, should I be taking more AP courses? Like, I heard the colleges like that, you know, that's when I sit down with them for a one-on-one meeting, right? And sometimes, honestly, it comes from the parents, right? A lot of these parents, they can have expectations for their children that don't necessarily match up with the interests or passions that the children themselves might have. So I'm always more than happy to have collaborative conversations with parents as well, in terms of managing expectations and making sure that we're all on the same page. I like to keep parents updated on some of the things of how these college admission standards are changing, as spearheaded by, a school that many of them are often obsessed about. I think that I'm good at getting people to listen to things in a way that kind of speaks to reason, right? Yeah, it's a hard question, but those are the things that are coming to mind for me right now. Yeah.
Folks, I think we have about 5 minutes left. So if there's a burning question, let's make sure we have time to address that before our time is over today.
I did have one question in the chat, which was about middle grade students and how far in advance should we be thinking about college. are there conversations that we should be having with our younger kids? So could you address that a little bit?
So when you say middle grade, you mean like middle school?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'll be honest. You know, my expertise when it comes to working with that younger demographic is rather limited. But I think it's good to start talking about, like, there's this thing called college that you would eventually want to start thinking about, right? But I don't think that it should be, the narrative shouldn't start in, like, you know, 7th, 8th grade, you know. If anything, that should be a time for parents to think about, well, based on the things I see my kid doing, you know, whether that be in class or outside of class, what kinds of things do they seem to like at that point, right? Because maybe those are ideas that they could bring up to me, you know, like once they're in high school, right? It makes my life a lot easier if I'm talking to like a completely new freshman and already have some kind of rough idea of the things they've liked in the past, right? But I think it creates a lot of unnecessary early pressure if you're talking to like a preteen and saying like, okay, you're going to go to college, so start thinking about doing something. When it comes to like a 9th grader, they're young, but they're in the setting where they understand that all of a sudden everything counts, you know, from now on, right? It's a lot easier to sell them on pushing themselves to have that initiative to explore things and try things, because now they have that freedom of choice. That freedom of choice is kind of harder to come by in middle school, right? But yeah, you know, in terms of like those middle years, it's all about just nurturing interests, right? Whether that be hobbies, you know, whether that be athletics, right? Being there, being supportive for whatever makes them smile, right? And you know, in a perfect world, maybe that translates into something that they pursue in their later teenage years. Yeah, I'm sorry I can't give a more robust answer than that, but that's what comes to mind for me.
Well, I'd love to build on something you said, Mauricio, in terms of exploring the interests. And that is, you know, we have this wonderful program in middle school, the P3 or Personal Passion Projects, which it serves as sort of a precursor to January short term. And, you know, we really encourage kids to, you know, explore something that is meaningful to them. You know, it's so rare in middle school to have choice over something you want to explore. And we've carved that out for kids as, I mean, it's their time. They can craft it however they want to. And then we find people to support them, to mentor them so they can do those explorations. And it's as successful if they find out something that they really don't like as if they find out something they really do like, because that's part of the exploration process of getting to understand thyself, right? That's what you want, because gosh, none of us wants to send a kid off to college paying, you know, a lot of money for them to drop out or, you know, realize this is not the path I wanted to pursue. Let them do that in middle school with P3 and in upper school with their JST and their coursework. It really is a gift that we're giving kids to have some agency over their learning. So folks, we're at 9:59. This has been wonderful. Mauricio, I want to thank you for taking the time this morning to chat with our families that are here. And I want to thank all of our families for tuning in and for all the great questions you have. And, you know, just know Mauricio is available to you, as he said. If you have questions, just reach out to him. He's really terrific. He's, as you can see, super approachable, and encourage your kids to do the same. It's one of the benefits of being a small community as we get to know each other, and we get to know each other really, really well. So folks, stay connected with us. You know, in these challenging times, we have to work a little harder to do it, but I am so appreciative of this incredible community we have at Roycemore and how you all engage with us in the way that you do.
Thank you,
you.
Adrianne. Thank you, Mauricio.
Of course.
A plug for the next one, for our next, What's Brewing will be, I think, April 6th, so be on the lookout for that one.
Thank you so much. This was wonderful.
Thank you. Have a
Thanks,
great day.
everybody. Have a great
Thanks.
day.